Here's the truth most people don't realize when they first click on this story. This isn't just about one bad take or one unlucky controversy. This is about watching someone slowly unravel in real time, mistake by mistake, decision by decision, until there's almost nothing left of the image they spent years building. And if you're here to understand how Pirate Software's life started falling apart, you're going to get exactly that, but not all at once. Because the real story isn't in a single moment, it's in the pattern.
The level of stupid that I just had to receive was like sitting on Twitter for 12 hours. This sucks. That's a really stupid move.
For a long time, Pirate Software built himself up as the kind of person who always knew better. The guy with experience, with insider knowledge, with stories about working in the industry that made him sound like he'd seen it all. He didn't just present himself as knowledgeable, he positioned himself as someone you shouldn't question. And for a while, that worked. People bought into it, they trusted him, they repeated his claims, they treated his word like it carried weight. But the cracks didn't show up overnight. They started small. Back in early 2025, there was an incident during a World of Warcraft run that, on its own, probably shouldn't have been a big deal. A single moment where teamwork mattered, and he chose not to help. The result? His teammates lost months of progress. Naturally, people were upset, anyone would be. But what really mattered wasn't the mistake, it was how he responded to it. Instead of acknowledging what happened, instead of saying, "Yeah, I messed up," he pushed back. Hard. He mocked the criticism, brushed it off, and acted like the entire situation was beneath him. That response didn't just frustrate people, it revealed something deeper, a refusal to accept fault. A need to always come out on top, even when it didn't make sense. He ended up getting kicked from the guild he was part of. At the time, it didn't seem like a massive turning point. His audience didn't collapse. His reputation didn't immediately take a hit. But it planted the seed of a pattern that would keep repeating. Because a few months later, things escalated. When the Stop Killing Games movement started gaining traction, it quickly became one of those rare moments where the gaming community largely agreed on something. It was about preserving games people had already paid for. About pushing back against companies shutting down access to products after the fact. It was, by most standards, a consumer-friendly initiative. People expected him to support it. Instead, he went in the opposite direction, and not quietly. He didn't just disagree, he went all out, aggressively tearing it apart, calling it stupid, dismissing it entirely, and the way he did it rubbed people the wrong way immediately. It wasn't just disagreement, it felt hostile, dismissive, and completely out of touch with what the community actually cared about. That's when the backlash really started. Viewers began questioning him. Other creators spoke up, and instead of slowing down, instead of reconsidering, he doubled down. He stuck to his stance, refused to clarify or correct anything, and when things got worse, he shifted into something else entirely, playing the victim. He claimed people were targeting him unfairly, said his projects were being attacked, tried to frame the situation as if he was the one being wronged. But by that point, the damage was already spreading. Subscriber counts started dropping, viewership declined, and what made it worse was that none of it seemed to change his approach. If anything, it made him more defensive. Then came the moment that really shook his credibility. For years, he had leaned heavily on his background, talking about his experience, his time in the industry, his technical expertise. It was a core part of his identity, so when someone took a closer look at his actual coding work and put it under scrutiny, it hit differently. The analysis wasn't flattering. It pointed out basic mistakes, questionable practices, things that didn't line up with the level of experience he claimed to have. And suddenly, people weren't just debating opinions anymore. They were questioning whether his entire persona had been exaggerated. Once again, he had a choice. Address the criticism, clarify, show proof, maybe even admit that he wasn't as perfect as he presented himself. Instead, he attacked the person who made the video, dismissed them as irrelevant, avoided the technical points entirely, and when pressed on specifics, he deflected, changing the subject, reinterpreting questions, anything to avoid directly engaging with the criticism. That didn't help. It made things worse. Because now, it wasn't just about whether he was right or wrong, it was about how he handled being challenged. And the answer, more and more, seemed to be the same every time. Then came the situation that completely shattered whatever trust was left. A claim surfaced that a major milestone on his channel, a record-breaking hype train, had been artificially inflated. That he, along with someone close to him, had essentially boosted it himself. At first, he denied it completely, acted like the accusation was ridiculous. But then evidence came out. Screenshots, transactions, details that lined up too well to ignore. And just like that, the narrative shifted from controversial creator to something much worse. Someone who wasn't just defensive or arrogant, but potentially dishonest. At this point, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every situation followed the same trajectory. Something happened. He responded aggressively, refused to admit fault, deflected, and when evidence piled up, it only made the fallout bigger. By the end of 2025, the impact was undeniable. Massive subscriber losses, a huge drop in viewership, a reputation that had gone from respected to widely questioned in a matter of months. But strangely, that wasn't the end, because even after everything, there was still a core audience left. People who stuck around, people who were willing to give him another chance. And with that kind of support, there was still a path forward if he was willing to take it. That's what made his next move so interesting. At the end of the year, he announced a month-long event focused on indie games. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing that could help rebuild his image, supporting smaller developers, giving them exposure, creating something positive. And at first, people were on board. It looked like a step in the right direction, a chance to shift the narrative, to show that he could contribute something meaningful to the community. But once the event actually started, the cracks appeared again.
For the entire month of December, we're going to be doing an event. We're going to be calling it the Indecember Games Show. One of the things that I've seen with traditional game shows is they're usually quite short. It's usually just a day or a couple of hours. Those games don't get a lot of breathing room. It's usually just an ad that plays. So since I'm doing it over the entire month, we're going to be playing those games on stream. We're going to be talking to developers. We're going to be interacting with those communities. We're going to be really doing deep dives on every one of these.
There were structural issues, lack of organization, no real system in place to support the developers beyond his own platform. And slowly, people began to question whether the event was really about helping others or about putting himself back in the spotlight. It wasn't a massive scandal, not like the others, but it reinforced something that people were already starting to believe, that even when trying to do something good, he couldn't step out of the center of it. And then came 2026. A situation that, under different circumstances, might have been simple. A game project he had supported for years suddenly shut down. The community was shocked, angry, looking for answers. And right before the announcement, he quietly distanced himself from it. Then, after everything went public, he spoke out, saying he wasn't surprised, that he had seen issues, that he had reasons for stepping away. On paper, that sounds reasonable, but given everything that had happened before, people didn't take it at face value. They started asking questions. If he had concerns, why didn't he raise them earlier? If he saw problems, why support it for so long? Why step away right before things collapsed? To address this, he released an explanation, pointing to moderation issues within the community. Serious ones. Claims about toxic behavior that wasn't being handled properly. At first, it seemed like a strong justification, but then more information came out. Context, responses, details from the other side of the conversation. And once again, the story didn't line up the way he presented it. The messages he shared, meant to prove his point, ended up doing the opposite. They showed that the situation was more nuanced, that the issues weren't exactly what he claimed, and that his expectations might have been unrealistic. What stood out most wasn't the disagreement, it was his reaction to it. Frustration, escalation, a demand for immediate action that didn't align with how moderation systems typically work. And when he didn't get the response he wanted, he pushed harder. The response from the other side remained calm, measured, explaining limitations, context, process. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was already done, because for the audience watching all of this unfold, it felt like déjà vu. Another situation, another version of events. Another moment where he positioned himself as completely right and everyone else as the problem, and at some point, people stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. That's really what this entire story comes down to. It's not about one controversy, not one mistake you can point to and say, that's where everything went wrong. It's about a pattern that kept repeating over and over again until it became impossible to ignore. A consistent inability to pause, reflect, and consider a simple thought. Maybe I'm wrong. Every time that moment appeared, every chance to reset the narrative, he made the same choice. Instead of stepping back, he leaned in. Instead of acknowledging, he defended. Instead of listening, he deflected. And when the pressure built, when the criticism grew louder, he didn't adjust, he doubled down. At first, that kind of response can look like confidence, like someone standing firm in their beliefs. But over time, it starts to feel different. It starts to feel like avoidance. Like a refusal to engage with reality when it doesn't match the image you've created for yourself. And that's where the real damage happens. Not in the original mistake, but in the response that follows it. Because people are willing to forgive errors. They expect them. What they struggle to accept is someone who never admits to them. Someone who treats every challenge as an attack, and every critic as the problem. That pattern doesn't just hurt reputation, it erodes trust, slowly at first, then all at once. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. And over time, that choice added up. Because the internet doesn't forget patterns, it notices them, it builds a narrative out of them. And once that narrative sets in, it's incredibly hard to break. What makes this situation frustrating isn't just the downfall itself, it's how avoidable it was. At so many points along the way, a different response could have changed everything. A simple acknowledgement, a moment of humility, a willingness to engage honestly. But those moments never came, and now, the result is what you see. A creator who once had momentum, credibility, and a growing platform, now struggling to be taken seriously. Not because of one mistake, but because of how every mistake was handled. And maybe the most telling part of all is how people sum it up now. Not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with something closer to disbelief. Because when you look at the entire timeline, it almost feels unreal how quickly everything unraveled and how consistently the same choice led it there every single time.